As the years have gone on, games have changed. Whether it's graphics, gameplay, style, games just continue and continue to evolve. But another thing that continues to evolve with the games is the genre, but not in a way that most would expect. These days, games are feeling more and more similar. You can buy 10 new games and all of them will pretty much have the same buttons, the same gameplay, the same sort of quests and objectives. So that makes me question, what is going on with games genre these days? Every game you seem to play seems to have a mixture of elements from every single style, all moulded into one thing now. A few examples. Fallout is considered an RPG, but it is just as much a first-person shooter, an open-world action game, but it is still considered an RPG. See, to me, when I think of RPG, I think of very closed-knit style that you used to have back in the day. Your Final Fantasies, Breath of Fires, the Persona games, and stuff like that. You do have the variations like the Western style, so your Elder Scrolls games and things like that, but the thing that made those games RPGs in the first place was, let's take for example the Western RPGs, because the Japanese style RPGs are very samey. They all have the same rules where you have like a battle system and you've got the overworld view, the battle system view, but the Western RPG had a slightly different approach. But the way that they made those games was when you attacked, it had a system in place that was more like a Dungeons and Dragons style system. So each action that you took had a value set to it. So for example, depending on the weapon that you've got equipped, had X amount of chance of hitting, depending on where you're gonna hit. I mean, Fallout 4 still sort of does this with the VAT system, but if you don't use the VAT system, this stuff doesn't matter. If you aim right and you shoot in the head, you're gonna get a headshot. It's not dependent on the value or like what weapons you're using. Well, it does to an extent, obviously, but it's not the same. You can play that game entirely as a first-person shooter without even using any elements of RPGs. And the same with them values is you leveled up items, abilities, and stuff like that, whereas it's not so much no more. Another example of an RPG is like The Witcher. The Witcher, as much as it is an RPG game, is just as much a hack and slash adventure action game. You do get all the leveling up systems and things like that, but these leveling up systems have crossed over into games that are not considered RPGs. So you can look at a game like Far Cry. The Far Cry series now has a sort of leveling up system. Like Far Cry 3, for example, you had this tattoo, and each part of the tattoo leveled you up. It leveled up a part of your character and your abilities and what you could do. Another example, and I think this is a sort of quite a good example, is the Resident Evil series. What is it that makes a Resident Evil game a Resident Evil game? Most people will shout horror. It's a horror game, which, yeah, I agree, it is a horror, obviously, but what dictates what makes that game a horror? Because if you look at each title, it's a good example because it's got so many games in the series and they all take different approaches. So you can say, for example, what made the first one scary was it had the tank controls, the fixed camera angles, the limited weapons, the closed-in spaces, and so on and so forth. That carried on, but then you got to number 3, all them systems was the same. The way you played the game was the same. Everything was the same, but it was more of an action game. And then you get to number 4. Number 4 is an out-and-out action game. It is basically the same idea of a first-person shooter, but it's still considered Resident Evil horror game. Then you have number 5, which was exactly the same pretty much in every way to number 4, but that one's considered not scary. But the systems are the same. Pretty much it's like a scene for scene remake of number 4. The same things happen. You have the same stupid giant guy, but Like all the events that happen in it are pretty much the same. Then you get to 6 where it was pretty much every single fucking game style in one thing. And then you get to number 7, which is the new one that's just come out, and now it's first person. So it's essentially a first person shooter now. But what is it that makes these games like the genre that they are? It's not so much, it's moved away from the mechanical aspect of the game. The game used to be classed on what it was, genre-wise, on the mechanical basis of how the game worked. Now it is more a tone. So should we be asking what the genre of these games are based on the way they play or the tone of the game? Because they're getting more and more confusing these days. Well, not even so much confusing, it's getting very homogenized the way games are created. Every game has a similar setup, which in some ways is good because you can automatically pick up a controller. You don't have to learn what you're doing. You just know. It's more like an instinct. The buttons are always in the same place. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to pick up an instruction manual and figure out what you have to do no more. But at the same time, I feel that this is an aspect that's limiting games. It is limiting what people are getting out of it. That's why you have games that are like exceptions from the rule. So a good example of an exception, which is not so much even an exception because it just basically follows the fundamental rules which the genre followed. There's a game called I Am Setsuna. This game was basically a love letter to Super Nintendo era RPG games, Japanese RPG games. And all it did was it put all the same functions and the same gameplay style and the same mechanics into a game, and it made it a true Japanese style RPG. Don't get me wrong, like when I say about these genres, not every game out there is doing this, but it feels like maybe it's more so in the AAA scene or just the mainstream of games, bigger, higher budget games. But it just feels like every game that's coming out now is the same. All games now are just over-the-shoulder shooting games or first-person shooting games. Sometimes you don't even have weapons in these first-person games, but it's just a trend of games these days. Don't take me as complaining about this at the same time, do you know what I mean? Because it's also produced some of the best games so far. But at the same time, this is why I think that the genres that these games are put into are redundant. You have games like The Last of Us. What would you class The Last of Us as? It's kind of a horror game. It's kind of an adventure game. It's a stealth game. It's got so many elements of so many different games all put into one, but that's not what makes the game good. That's not what people enjoyed or loved about that game. It was the tone of the game that made people like it so much. The new Resident Evil that's just come out is not so much that it's the best horror game ever, and everyone's saying, oh yeah, it's Resident Evil Return to Form. Yeah, I understand that they've brought back elements from the original games, like, save boxes is mechanically similar, but it's not at all. Do you know what I mean? It's a completely different game, but it's the tone that makes it more attractable to the original audience of the game that liked it. When you take the tone of the game away, it doesn't become what it's supposed to be. We'll go back to Fallout. Fallout, it's the tone of the game. It's not necessarily the fact, because the original games was isometric, like point and click style. Now it's set from the first person, but what makes the game great is the tone that the game sets. The genre is irrelevant of why that game's good and why people like that game. Another example, Grand Theft Auto. A lot of people rag on Grand Theft Auto 4. I personally don't really like it that much. I thought it was quite a crap game. But what makes that game any less better than any of the other Grand Theft Autos? Because they work the same. They're essentially all the same game. But then everyone loves Grand Theft Auto 5. Everyone absolutely adores that game. But it's the tone. It's the tone of them games that makes them what they are. Grand Theft Auto Vice City and San Andreas, they couldn't be more different. But the tone of each of them games is what made the game great. Anyway, I'm just rambling. This was just something I had on my mind, and I thought, why not just say something about it? Obviously, this don't apply to all games. This ain't me complaining either. This is just something that's been on my mind and I've been thinking about. This obviously doesn't go to all games, because you've got obviously your sports games, you've got your fighting games. Do you know what I mean? You've got your different types of games out there, your different genre, like bare bone genre game. Do you know what I mean? Like The bracket games, I think, is a better way to describe these things, you know what I mean? Because sports is never going to be there's never going to be a horror sports game, is there? I'm just rambling on a bit, so tell me what you think about this. Am I just being stupid? Am I overthinking things? Just let me know in the comments below, and let me know if you enjoyed or found this, I don't know, if this just interests you in any way. Let me know, because I don't know if I'll make any more videos like this, but I just thought I'll put my opinion out there on the subject. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Again, leave me a comment below, tell me what you think. Remember, subscribe, there'll be more, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.